Okay. stick that on my pocket. Yeah. Is it already on? Is it already on? Okay, so don't say anything I shouldn't say.
Good afternoon.
Yeah.
Hello, hello. Was the lunch any good? Should we do that next year? Okay. I think so. One thing we want to talk about it later on, maybe one of the sessions tomorrow, is maybe if we need to change the date a little bit, we may. The reason why it got done Monday and Tuesday as opposed to the normal Thursday and Friday is because about a month ago, 2 months ago, the presidents on the president's meeting on the fly changed their legislative workshop, and it's occurring at the end of this week, Thursday and Friday. And because a lot of us gonna work with them on that, it's not gonna be feasible to do 2 conferences at the same time where many of us have to be in both places. So sorry about that. So we'll see how the legislative workshop goes next year. But anyway, having said that, I got Deborah Gilbert, who I highly revere, and she's leaving us. This is her last big shindig here.
That's right.
So we're going to miss you.
Gonna miss you too.
The floor is yours.
All right. So Raul is going to turn my pages while I stand here and get ready. But I want to thank y'all for being here. I've been with y'all over the past few years, and I've enjoyed speaking to this group. It's a great group. I am retiring on June 30th, and I'm going to miss y'all. I miss everybody here. Raul, I want you to know that I'm going to miss our late afternoon conversations in regard to data and all of that. We have some pretty in-depth conversations from time to time, and I want y'all to know he does a great job, and we're really blessed to have Raul here at the MCCB. Raul asked me to give an overview of the funding for FY19 and to, you think I need to walk away? Okay. Okay, so he had asked me to kind of give an overview of FY19. There are going to be some funding formula changes in 19 in regards to the virtual that Raul mentioned earlier with the data elements that we're collecting and all. And so that's what I have for you. Okay, so there we go, the overview and a review of the funding formula, and then an in-depth look at the funding formula changes. I've kind of gone step by step on that, so it may take a little while to go through that. The funds that come into the state of Mississippi, almost $6 billion in funds. 37% of those is in sales tax and 33% in individual income tax. Those two components, next slide, Raul. Those two components total 70% of the funds that come into the state just from those two sources. The general fund appropriations these are the funds that the legislature, once the revenue comes in, the legislature appropriates the funds, and all educational activities receives 52.99%. We're included in that 52.99%. Community colleges are. But in the past, we have received as much as 60%. I think one year maybe 61% of that. So of the general funds, we've been kind of on a downward slope. I've got a comparison here for the total education general fund comparing 2000 to 2019, and you'll see that in 2000 all educational entities received 57.44, and in 2019 52.8%. You can see that K-12 went up slightly, IHL went down considerably, and the community colleges went down from 4 to 3.5%. In 2017, 3.77 of the total general funds, and in 2019 is sliding on down to a little lower than the 3.77 to 3.49. This is our share of the total general funds. Then on the next slide, if you'll see the this is our percentage, community college percentage, 7.11 in 2017 of just those all educational activities. We were getting 7.11 in 2019. We're expected to receive 6.59%. This is some recent funding for the community colleges in 2016, and I know you all are aware of this because you felt the cuts. In 2016, we had 2 mid-year cuts that amounted to almost 2% of our budget. In 2017, we had 4 mid-year cuts, and that was right at 5%. And then in 2018, the year that we're about to complete, we had a $28 million reduction. That's almost 11%. And 23 million of that was in the funding formula that we'll be talking about later. We've received our 2019 appropriation. It really basically is level funded as far as state support is concerned. The only difference is there's a $180,000 increase that we received in authority, special fund authority for our health and life insurance carryover fund. This just gives a historical view of the appropriations in the red line, and then that was before cuts, and then the green line shows after cuts. So you can kind of see those, actually the years that we had peaks in our funding, we received cuts in those years. It's kind of been a little roller coaster ride there. Our CJC appropriation for our FY19, you can see $231,642,911. It's broken down by funding source, and you can see in that top line the funding formula, $187,975 compared to the prior year. It's an increase of $33,900, and that was some health insurance adjustments that were made. Okay, so basically the state support, the general fund is $187 million, education enhancement $43 million, and then the health insurance carryover of $560. So our total that we're looking at for 2019 is $231,642,911. This is a summary of community college support that's broken down by funding source, and then also broken down by the 15 different colleges. So you can compare in 19 to 18 and the differences there. But this combines the support formula with any other line items for the general fund. And this is the whole harmless that's being applied to the total support, We'll go into more detail about the whole harmless and how that calculation is done in just a few minutes. There are 6 schools that will be receiving the whole harmless. This is just the general fund support. That first column is the funding formula. The other columns that follow are line items that are in our appropriation bill, so you can see how those funds are divided among the 15 colleges. Total of $187 for the general fund. And then the state sources of $231,642,911, they account for a little over 38% of the overall E&G, which exceeds $606 million. That's with all the funding sources, the 606, with the federal sources, your local sources, student fees, etc. Of the state sources of $231,642, $187,975, or 81%, are allocated through the funding formula. And you can see that all of the education enhancement funds, all 43 million of those are in the funding formula. They're not divided into other line items. So we'll be looking at just the funding formula now. But before we get into the funding formula and the changes that the virtual made on it, there's something that you need to know about the base. The amount that we use to calculate the base is the prior year funding formula amount, and as we mentioned earlier, it decreased by $23 million. So the amount that was calculated for the base for FY18 was a certain amount, and when we calculated it for 19 and that amount went down $23 million, the impact on each college is a $230,000 reduction for every single college due to the prior year amount shrinking in the funding formula. So that change hit us without anything else, not to consider the enrollment or the virtual changes. All right, here's the actual funding formula as it is run with the new weights for MSVCC and with the shared as opposed to the part-time numbers being put in there. And then the next sheet gives you a comparison. It's by 15 colleges, gives you a comparison to 2018. And fortunately in 2018 we have not had any budget cuts this year, so there aren't any other comparisons, just the actual funding formula. So you can see there's an increase of $33,800, and you can see there's a lot of increases and decreases in there by individual college. Okay, so when we started to move into the virtual changes, Krista, Dr. Mackey, Roll, and I kind of put together this sheet that will kind of capture some of the changes that are coming about. And so this is the sheet, but on the slides that follow, I'll point out individual things related to this sheet. But I thought you might want to have it in hand when you get home. All right, so on the next sheet, one of the things it addresses is why would we want to make the changes to the virtual. Well, in the old funding, in the funding formula that we were utilizing in 2018, there's really no logical reason for counting students, only part-time students in the virtual section. It was really a carryover, including the part-time students from the funding formula when we had a predominantly headcount funding formula prior to 2004. And so actually the changes will correct that problem that we had in the funding formula. The current 18 formula awards a premium incentive to the institution that teaches their own students or the institution that hosts and provides. The new formula will award a premium incentive to the institution that shares MSVCC students. So the institution that either hosts another college's students or provides to another college's students will receive the incentive in the funding formula in 19. So just to kind of show you some of the changes between the part-time and the shared, when we remove the part-time and replace it with the shared, you'll see that the part-time FTEs were a lot greater, 5,418 FTE total for host provider in the 2018 funding formula. There are much fewer shared FTEs, and so that the shared for the 2019 funding formula is 1,125. So just that difference makes a major difference in the funding formula, and there's a couple of ways to show that. In the next slide, you'll see that not only are we changing from the part-time to the shared, but we're also changing the weights. In 18, they were 0.5 for the host and 0.5 for the provider. And in 2019, the host will receive more incentive at 0.75 and the provider at 0.25. Also, with the shared FTE host and provider incentive, dually enrolled student semester credit hours will no longer be considered in the MSVCC incentive section of the formula. Many of the colleges had begun to add dual enrolled students into the virtual section in addition to the academic section, and it was really draining a lot of funds off of the other sections, the academic, career, and technical sections, and placing that into the virtual section. In the fall of 2016, the dual enrollment accounted for 16.9% of the total head count. And Raul gave me the fall figures for 17 last week, and I looked at that today. And in the fall of 17, that 16.9% figure has gone up to 22.3%. So 22.3% of the head count at the community colleges in fall of 17 is dual. The credit hour production is less. It was 4% in 16, and that's gone up to, I believe, 5.31% in the fall of 2017. Okay, so the impact of the funding. A few minutes ago, when we looked at both the weight change and the going from part-time to shared, we noticed that there was a lot of difference in the FTE. Well, those FTE in 2018 generated $6,492,000 in the host provider section of the funding formula. When we recalculate with the shared only in 2019 with the formula weight changes, that generates $1,439,852. So there's a $5 million shift. We're shifting funds out of the virtual incentive section and moving those funds into all other sections of the funding formula. And so this shows the host provider at the new weights. Okay. Because there are fewer shared students, this will ultimately result in an increase in the weight. So the weight of one reimbursement in 2018 was $2,396.55, and it's estimated for FY19 for that to go up to $2,558.83, and that's pretty much the result of the shift to the weights and the virtual changes. So another part of the dual change was the change in the fees. What's proposed beginning July 1 is to charge 90 cents per semester credit hour. versus the $12 that's currently being charged for MSVCC course for a student to take a course in virtual. The new assessment will be a decrease in fees for some colleges and an increase for other colleges. And the 90-cent assessment over all students as opposed to just the virtual is because all students take part and benefit from the services that are provided. Okay. So this is a calculation of the $12 fee currently as it is now compared to the 90-cent fee, and you can see the $12 generates $1.771 million, and the 90-cent fee generates about $1.6 million. So we're losing a little bit there, but there is a fairly significant cash balance in MSVCC right now that will be sustainable over the years. Some of the things you might want to know that the Community College Board uses with that assessment, those assessed fees, in addition to the $12 per virtual, and to there is another category that the colleges receive funds, and that is from the education technology. There's a line item in the support bill. It's a little over $7 million, and some of those funds come to the board office. Some go to Ray Smith's area for technology, and then there's some other funds that come to Krista LeBron's area for the MSVCC. So a combination of the fees and those education technology funds support Canvas and Turnitin and the MS Sarah, that's a new initiative, and then the Mello. We're spending over $400,000 on a contract for Mello for all kind of online library services, and these things all the colleges can benefit from. So then, in order to do this, as you all know, when a funding formula, a new formula change is being implemented, there are going to be some schools that are harmed and some schools that are going to benefit from the change. And so we wanted to have a one-year hold harmless provision to help those colleges that when you look at the combined loss through the proposed funding formula and after the fee assessment, because the same college could be harmed by the formula and the fee assessment, taking both of those into consideration, we wanted to look at the whole harmless. And when we ran the whole harmless provision, and let me back up a minute. When we ran all of these numbers, it was on summer, actual audited summer numbers, fall pre-audit, and now that we've gotten those numbers, but they've changed very little. There are hardly any efficiencies applied to those. And then we use the prior spring because we haven't audited the spring yet. So those are the figures, and so when we say estimated, these figures will change once we get the actual spring numbers into the funding formula. But for the whole harmless provision, $606,877 was the calculation. And this sheet provides, it's kind of a little fuzzy there, but it provides, this is the whole harmless run. You can see that the weights are taken back to the 0.5, and have gone in and entered the part-time numbers into the host provider. Okay, so on the whole harmless, we took the same amount of funding, the 2019 funding. We kept the base the same as the one that we were running before, and the two things that I just mentioned that we changed was the weights. We moved the weights back, and we put the part-time enrollment as opposed to the shared in there. And so that's how we get the whole harmless. Everything else pretty much held constant except for those 2 virtual changes. Okay, so and if you will bear with me, I've had summer cold or something, and sometimes my voice just kind of goes away. The whole harmless with the old 50-50 compared to with the part-time results in the weight decreasing from 25.58 down to 24.69.79. So we said that this 25.58.83 is actually the amount of the weight of 1 for FY19. But when we run the whole harmless, it's lower at the 24.69.79, and that's really due to those part-time enrollments and a little bit due to the 50-50. Okay, so what we did, we have the current funding formula, the formula with the shared host provider, and then we look at the formula with the whole harmless provision, and so we have differences there. The ones in red are the ones that are losing money. When we look at that, you'll see that there are 6 institutions that need to be made whole through the changes in the funding formula, and also the fee difference is applied in there before you get to those 6. So earlier when we looked at this slide, you could see that those 6 were the ones, but the sheets before, you can tell kind of the ins and outs of how those things were calculated. All right. So 6 colleges, Co-Lin, East Miss, Holmes, ICC, JCJC, and Mississippi Gulf Coast will receive additional funding from the whole harmless provision in the total amount estimated at $606,877. The whole harmless amounts range from a little over $6,000 at Jones to $194 at ICC, so there's a large range. And this will be a one-time whole harmless that will come from the MSVCC budget for 2019. The pages that follow, I think it's 40 through 45 or so, those are the enrollments that back up the funding formula. And unless you have questions, I won't spend a lot of time on that. You'll note that fall was pre-audit and spring is for 17, so we're waiting on the 18 figures to come in for those. Okay, keep going. Associate degree nursing, and then the allied health, and then here's the virtual, and this is with the spring. The virtual is with the shared. Okay, the next thing I have here is for, that kind of completes the part on the funding formula. Do y'all have any questions related to the changes that are going to occur beginning July 1 with virtual? If not, the student fees and charges per semester, this is a sheet we collect from the colleges every year. The next sheet roll will kind of give you a clearer picture of these are the like mandatory fee, tuition and mandatory fees that everybody is charged. When you compare 18 to 19, system-wide there's about a $36 increase. This is per semester as opposed to per year, or a 2.34% increase. A lot of colleges increased tuition last year when we had the $28 million cut, so not as many colleges were increasing tuition this year. Some of the ones that didn't increase as much last year as some went ahead and increased this year. All right, and then these are just some charts. This is one that Dr. Billy Stewart wanted to look at, but it basically shows that years that we've had an increase in an appropriation or a decrease in appropriation, we have had to raise our tuition. So this is basically what that shows. this is a sheet that really, to me, tells a story. And that basically is that in 2000, the community college share of the total revenues in our budget, the state support compared to the total, it was 55.7. And we're estimating for 2019, based on the FY19 appropriation, that that's going to be 38.2% of our budget. So we're going from 55.5 to 38.2. And then on the flip side, the student tuition and fees for 2000 was less than 18%. And in estimated 2019, that's going to be up to 36%. And so the shift is going from state support to the students and parents. Got a question?
Are there any, besides parents and students absorbing that or rejecting those costs onto the students, is the state, is the agency looking at any other private or foundational funding sources or partnerships that would help offset or add revenue streams to the budget?
Right. Somebody else may want to help me out with that, but you know, the presidents will meet the end of this week on Thursday and Friday, and on Friday they will approve the request for 2020. In there, I'm expecting them to have a request in there for dual enrollment. The dual is kind of eating our lunch right now, and to request support from the state to offset, because we're deeply discounting, and the tuition, or maybe not even discounting, just offering a lower tuition. So that's going to be one of the things that I think will be in the budget request. Also, Dr. Graham wanted to look at the cost to educate a student, and so we've looked at that on a national level and kind of use that to back into our budget request. So, we're trying to make the legislature aware of what is happening. Like I mentioned in the previous slides, educational entities used to receive 60%. And then in 1993, we got the Education Enhancement Funds, and those funds are not enhancing. They have actually they are supplementing. They're taking the place of the general funds, because every time that education enhancement funds are increased, they offset that same increase with a decrease in our general fund. So instead of enhancing, it's really replacing the general fund. So anyway, and IHL is kind of in the same boat that we're in. We're kind of losing ground. Not only all educational entities are losing ground with the percent of the overall general fund or total state support budget, but also within the educational entities, both IHL and community colleges are kind of are losing. So did that help a little? I do believe the presidents will put something in the request, but then we rarely ever get our full request. Thank you. So we've already kind of talked about that. In 2018, the community colleges tuition annually was $3,100 and IHL $7,423. In 19, and this figure is the 1588 figure is wrong. I got some updates that are in the previous slides. That 1588 should be 1591. So the average for that one semester tuition and required fees is 1588. They range from 1435 at Kahoma to 1740 at Jones. We have 2 colleges that are meeting this week. Their board is meeting this week to approve their tuition. So there could be some changes to what I presented. They went ahead and sent me the changes, but it could be that their board decides to do something differently. But I think what we have is pretty accurate. So this slide just shows those shifts in revenue sources. So we're up here at 55.5, and we've gone down. And then tuition and fees was down here around 18%, and now it's at 36%. So we've just kind of have an inverted problem here with the sources of funding. Another thing on top, kind of Angela, to kind of carry a little bit of that conversation on. Another thing that that we're doing is discounting scholarshiping. That has grown, and that's a problem with our budgets too. We're having a lot more expense in that area, due to the tuition increase. When you raise tuition and you discount the tuition, then you have the problem that couples the problem. And this chart basically does the same one as the one previously, but it's just in a bar graph, and it just shows the loss of support, and then the increase in the shift from the revenue coming from the state to the students. And that's really what I've prepared for you today. So do y'all have any questions about that? I've really enjoyed all these years. Thanks. Question?
Raul and this body, if I may take a point of privilege as being one of the senior people in the room. And I talked to a couple of people and asked them if they felt it would be okay if I made a couple of comments. And I don't call myself speaking on behalf of the group, but I am coming from a personal and a professional place when we say to you that we're going to miss you. Deborah, you have been a very instrumental person, a critical needs person in our system for such a long time that it's hard to imagine our system without you. But woe is us, we will try to do that. What we imagine, we hope is not as horrible as what we imagine. In the next few days, you are going to hear some glorious things about you that really don't compare, from my perspective, of the kind of professional you've been to the system and the value that you brought to the system. You have made doing so much with so little for so long. You do anything with nothing look like a piece of cake. I swear to God in heaven above that I don't know how you did it, and I hate to blaspheme, but I really don't know how you've done it. You have taken a surgeon's skill. When we say that the pen is mightier than the sword, your pen has been mightier than the sword. And you have craftfully and with surgical precision helped our state to craft budgets at a time when we were in critical mass or in critical need. So thank you so much for what you've done, and I'd like to invite my colleagues to stand with me and offer to you a standing ovation for being that person who was.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Beautiful words. Thank you so much.
And I want to add a BAM!
Let me take this off.
And another BAM is coming. It's Dr. Lynn Ladner-Tincher. Yeah, did I say it right? Something like that. I messed that one good, huh? And she was one of our own in the past.
I got this. That's actually happened. I'm all blind from all that computer work. Oh. Can you hook this up? Is that okay?
Put it on a disk. Do you have it on disk?
Oh, there's a couple of different files, but yeah. Do you have a We're gonna take a small break, y'all. It's HDMI though, so. Do you have HDMI?
Disconnected earlier.
Okay. I'll just
So you can't hear.
I can put it on a thumb drive. Do you have one?
Yeah, right there.
Let me set it down. You're fine. I should have sent it over. I've been traveling. Yeah, just put that open and accessible, but this is the... Yeah, and you might want to pull it to the desktop. Just close it. Close it. Or you can minimize it. Or you might want to pull both these to the desktop because they're so big it won't read. It'll be real sluggish presentation.
This one?
Both of those. Y'all have a clicker? Are you the clicker?
Use the clicker. You have the click?
You can, no, you can click for me or I can click. Got this. Yeah, I want to go through that at some point. Okay. PowerPoint. That's it. Okay. Alrighty. You want to introduce me, or you want me to introduce myself? Do you want me to introduce me, or you want me to introduce myself, or do they know me?
I think most of them know you, but go ahead and...
No. Okay. I think we're ready to go, folks. Thank you for inviting me to give a keynote of my office is at Phi Theta Kappa just across the street. I think I'm a loud talker, so I recognize some familiar faces in the audience. most of that, I'll set it off. I'm here to give you sort of memoirs of someone who was a faculty member and a math tutor and a software developer and an institutional researcher and an effectiveness person and at Mississippi Gulf Coast Community College. Hey there. And I just came by today to sort of give you advice on things that I wish someone would have told me at some point in my career before I had to find them out the hard way. And I think even if I have a piece of advice, it may not affect you and your job directly, but it impacts your college and your institution. And so I'll just kind of go through some really highlights of my career, my aha learning moments about how to do stuff. And I think, and I left out all the stuff that would no longer apply today. And hopefully all of this is relevant. I don't want to get too close over here. This is me and my contact information. I did bring some cards of a much more important and efficient version of myself. My assistant's cards are down here, and she would get you copies of this presentation or copies of anything that we even talk about today. So this is probably not a good way to reach me. You might want to reach me through Frederica. So next slide. If you don't know much about Phi Theta Kappa, I'm the third CEO in 100 years, so no pressure there. And our offices are ironically right across the street. It's really cool to be one of the players in the national space and to be from Mississippi. And when they expect for us to be in DC, and a lot of times they're like, gee, why is Phi Theta Kappa in Mississippi? And I said, why not? We have the oldest community college system in the entire United States. So I think it's absolutely perfect for Phi Theta Kappa to be in Mississippi. And that Mississippi community colleges as a whole have some of the higher graduation rates in the United States. So, there's a lot of student success going on here too. We actually have a two-part mission. I know our single, most important outward-facing thing is the gold stoles. When you see those at graduation, that's us, and that's kind of how we identify ourselves. And that's our recognition portion of our mission. But we actually are a lot like a college. We have classes, we have meetings, we do a lot of curriculum development, because a second part of our mission, which is the most expensive part, is providing sort of co-curriculars. Think of it as learning on the outside of the classroom, whereas you're more or less focused on it on the inside of the classroom as well. Okay. Just to kind of run down a little bit about Phi Theta Kappa, just to give you some context of who I am and what I'm doing now. These are some of the metrics about the society. Average age is the same as the national average age. We are a bit more full-time than a lot of other things. That probably contributes to the success of Phi Theta Kappa. And that's just sort of our metrics on who we are. But we do have 44% of our members had at least one DevEd class, so I think there's some perception that an honor student is someone who's just, naturally smart or whatever, but a lot of them are just very hardworking. And a lot of them are actually, quite, under their 49% are on Pell, but if you add that to the number that also get some type of, student loan, we're running about 55-60% students that are receiving some federal aid assistance. And lastly, and I guess I'll talk a little bit about where these numbers come from, this is sort of a composite. Wouldn't you like to work in a place where 91% of the students graduated? Because I get to do that. So that's really cool. So we have a 91% completion rate compared to 38% in the United States. And our students make on average about $71,000 a year, and here are some of the top majors. And 68% will go on to actually get a bachelor's degree. So these are some really cool things that I'm really proud of. I was actually hired at Phi Theta Kappa just to sort of do this work. And when the opportunity for the interim executive director came open, I was just the only PhD on staff. So I was tagged, you're it. So anyway, so it's nice to be in the right place at the right time, doing the right thing. But we're awfully proud of this national profile. The one for Mississippi, by the way, looks even better than this. The Mississippi profile for completion is like at 94%, 95%. Okay, next one. Okay, so let's stop with the Phi Theta Kappa commercial and talk about you all and your issues and your challenges on campus. And Deborah Gilbert being up here on stage, and I know she's retiring. I think there's a little thing for her this week or something. She's really amazing, though. And I want to, before I forget, to give a shout out to her. She would give us our money, and I would say, okay, the money's coming from here. And I could never really quite duplicate exactly dollar for dollar when we got our disbursement from our files that we turned into the state The funding formula was just a math problem to me, so I should be able to take the funding formula, take our data file, and I should be able to recreate this dollar number that got dropped into our bank account. And I never really could. But, you know, I would go see her all the time, and she would go over what I'm doing wrong, and a lot of that's actually in some of the presentation, but even though I could never match it plus or minus a couple $1,000, I always was confident that we had someone who was so highly ethical driving the boat of our money. So I was like, you know, if I couldn't get it, I wasn't really worried that there was anything going on because it was her. You know what I mean? It was her doing this. So anyway, she's not just really good and all those things that were just said about her. She's a highly ethical person that I always had a great amount of trust that we were getting what we needed to get, you know, no matter what. But anyway, that commercial's over too. Okay, so I'm going to really talk some high-level stuff, and then I'm going to get really specific into some things that I think might be of interest to you. And these are sort of my random thoughts on strategic planning. How many of you are involved in strategic planning on your campuses? You know, you all should be raising your hand. You're like, no, I don't do that. You know, in community colleges, I have advisors talk to me all the time. They go, Phi Theta Kappa is a lot of work, Lynn. And I go, yeah. I said, if you're going to work in a community college and survive and stay, guess what? It's called other duties as assigned. You can't get out of it if you're going to work in our sector. You cannot get out of it. I mean, be lucky that your other duties as assigned are these great students, you know. Mine was, let's get the college accredited, you know. Let's stay all night long and register students. I mean, you know, so anyway, so I don't feel sorry for anyone. We all have all these extra duties as assigned. When you're talking about a strategic plan, a lot of times the first thing that comes to mind is, we got to get everyone's input. Well, guess what? After you do all that, you can't afford that anyway, okay? So just know that when you're building a strategic plan, getting people's input, and I'm not saying you don't need to get out of step. You got to stay in step with what the community needs are, what the business needs are, what your president's needs are. I mean, be realistic, but that's only part of the strategic plan. So just remember that as you sort of, and I brought the latest one from Phi Theta Kappa, and there's some copies, obviously not enough for everyone, but there's a card there, you can get a copy of it. So just know that there's a lot more to it than just getting everyone's input. And when I first started strategic planning, I thought that's really all there was to it. And also, a lot of times, you're asked to do a strategic plan, but your budget is teeny tiny, right? My advice to you is the only time you can really get away with doing a strategic plan all by yourself without someone from the outside coming in and consulting you through it is when you have new leadership. Because all strategic planning process does is beat up on the leadership. You know, you're doing this wrong, you're doing that wrong. And so it's really hard for a seated leader or a seated college president or administration that's been in place a long time to sort of take that abuse without it coming from a third party and not from the internal operations of the organization. So if you're in a strategic planning meeting and you're doing a strategic plan and the president is not the new guy on the block, you might want to get someone else to come in and help you do that. And because I don't want you to ever get caught up in a situation where you're having to deliver bad news and they don't want to hear it, you know, so just random thought there. Strategic plans, when I first got into business in 1991, 90, I've been doing this since 1990, oh my God. When I did this, we had a 10-year strategic plan, and it worked perfectly, it really did. We actually stayed on this plan for 10 years. Do y'all remember those days? I know about 1/3 of you, but I know 1/3 of you know this. You can't do that anymore. Why can't you stay on a strategic plan for a very long time? What would be your guess? Change, but what kind of changes, though, that have really impacted us in the last 10 years? Technology. That's the real killer there, the show-stopping moment. For me, to not be able to predict in 10 years the kinds of technologies. I mean, you stay on your ERPs and you enhance them every 5 to 10 years, and then when you're in those last 5 years, you're really suffering because it's the product's really not doing what it needs to do and blah, blah, blah. So I would, you know, a 3-year horizon, if you can do that, more power to you. I could never do a deep enough scan every 3 years. I recommend you really do the process every 5 years, you know. A pretty deep scan every 5 years would be something I would recommend. And, you know, you would think people would tell you these things, but they don't, because you basically, you know, Sachs just says, thou shalt have, you know, a mission. and a plan. And so you go through these processes, and you're not just checking boxes, you're really guiding the institution. You have to put more thought into it. To publish the assessment. Now, so when a strategic plan is released, it has in it your goals, right? So raise your hand if your college's strategic plan also had with it the assessment outcomes, like what you wanted your graduation rate to be. Raise your hand if it had it. So yours had it. Usually in the PR version, the piece that you show out to the masses, you typically won't see the assessment of the plan in there, because what if you don't reach those goals? You know, what if you're struggling? What if something's going on in the space? So, you know, you really need two versions of the strategic plan. One you're going to show everyone, and then one you're going to show to the people who are responsible for executing the plan, which are the people that work for the institution. They're the executors of the plan. They're not the only stakeholders, but you've got to make sure that the assessment of the plan is very clear. And the Phi Theta Kappa strategic plan, I did show the assessment, but we're going through a culture change where they need to know what their assessments are. But my plan is also not on the website. It's not for general consumption, you know. So, but we've got to live with these assessments because we actually publish them out. The only time that you'll see them actually evaluated all in one place is on my review for my trustees. The board, Phi Theta Kappa Board of Directors, when I do my annual evaluation every January to where they're going to decide whether I get a contract the next year or not, I actually go through and assess our strategic plan and show them exactly where we are on it and what we're doing about it and if we're on target for the 5-year benchmarks that we set in that plan. So anyway, there are places for these things, but just know that sort of nuance about, you know, and then there are colleges that choose not to even make up the assessments, and that's not good. You need to make sure they go back and do, like you're shaking your head, yes? Okay. All right, next thing. So what goes into a strategic plan? This is sort of the stuff that went into Phi Theta Kappas. I know we're a national organization, so, you know, but I think even as a community college in Mississippi, you have to look at the national landscape. Like, if you look in California, like, I see students, we have 29 regions, and California is its own region, okay? And I was just there, and we took a picture of the regional officers. These are the best students in California, the 5 very best students in California, all in one picture. And every single one of them was a different color. I mean, there were so many different races. There were so many different, you could tell by the way they dressed, there was so much diversity going on, not just skin color, but it was just, you know. And then I pulled a picture of the same officer team 10 years ago from California, and it was all white, all male, and that's what it looks like. Do you see what I'm saying? And what's going on in California is just a precursor to what will happen everywhere in the United States. The explosion in the Hispanic population, and, you know, it's not just, so anyway, so what things are going on in other places in the world will eventually impact Mississippi. We're not usually the first place to have changes happen because our laws are the way they are, but they will happen. So you can't really see this, but I will email it to you. But when I say the landscape of what does everyone want isn't exactly the only thing that's made up into a strategic plan. But if you were to take your college's strategic plan, what would be the things that you what would have went into consideration here? Okay. So next slide. Okay, these slides do actually look right. I don't know why they're pushed down. I'm just kidding. Just sort of another thing. Okay, so we've talked a little bit about strategic planning, and you're sitting there and going, well, we don't have anything to do with that. But at your college, you really have 3 times of planning always going on. This operational planning level, you know, that's the one that SACS wants to see. You know, every single, what does it say? Educational, student service, and administrative unit will have a plan. So everybody in here is part of this operational planning process. And hopefully everyone in here is also part of a performance-based planning process. And that's where you have your individual employee assessment every year. And I'll talk a little bit more about those 2 things. So operational plans have to tie to budget and all this other stuff. And the performance plan to me is how good is the quality of individual work on your campus. If I could go back to my community colleges, you know, for the X many years I served there, you're like 23, Lynn. For the length of time I was at Mississippi Gulf Coast Community College, I wish the one thing I would have done was improve our individual assessment process to move culture and move change along just a little more quickly. It's a nice thought to think if our North Star is high graduation rates and our North Star is student success, then I think all of us in this room can agree there are some people that are not going to make it, you know? So we have to sort of look at that. And I think if there's anything that I probably could have done better would have been that inner circle of how we assess everyone's individual work. And so I'm just going to drop that little nugget on your plate. Not that that is your job, but it's just something to kind of think about as you go through. Because if you do go through a culture change at your institution, like say a huge shift in the way things were and the way things need to be, that trip there on average is 7 years. 7 years for a culture shift to go from, anyway, so individual performance planning. So basically it's, at Phi Theta Kappa, I base it off their job description. So when I was at Mississippi Gulf Coast, we actually had the same one for everyone. And that's what I think hurt it, because it wasn't based on your individual job versus your individual job versus yours. You see? It was based on a generic thing. So another thing that happened at Phi Theta Kappa is I have employees, or I had some people, they were perfect. They were perfect. Like, you give them something to do and they would eat it up. And they would do it right. I actually had one of the most perfect, technically perfect employees and would execute every job they gave them perfectly. The problem is, the person was a big jerk to everyone. No, seriously. I mean, a huge abrasive person. But they were a great employee, right? What do you do about that? So what part of your performance planning needs to look at that? Well, what I then had to do at Phi Theta Kappa is I had to develop a set of values about how we would treat each other. So on the individual performance planning, not only did we have their job description, we also had the values. Are you a good team player? And things like that. So when they started violating those values of the organization, that was kind of terms for termination. Does that make sense? So there's really two things going on. I mean, it took 2 years. I mean, we really worked with this person to say, hey, you're a big jerk. No one likes you. But so anyway, just kind of tuck that into your, what are your institution's values? Do you guys all have values? I mean, you all write them down and you kind of talk about them, but do you really live and breathe them? Because if you're going to have a consistent culture in your organization where everybody's doing their best, because trust me, it's not just in Mississippi that the money is tight. It is tight everywhere. And it's tighter in some states than it is here. And schools are having to go through and say, okay, who's staying? Who is staying? And then we're going to do that eventually, I know. If not, we probably already have started, because like I said, there are 2/3 of the faces in here I've never seen. But anyway, so culture shifts do take 7 years. The only time you can make them smaller is to introduce a lot of new people. And so it's just something to kind of think about from a research standpoint. Okay, let's talk about publishing information. Now, who are the researchers in the room and the IEIR people? So there's a good number of you. Kind of more speaking to you on this. A lot is expected out of your tiny offices. How many staff do you have? Like 1.5, 1.0, 0.5? So our staffs in institutional research and effectiveness, they tend to be very small. And there's all these things. There's everyone's operational plans. There's the strategic plan. There's all these files that you upload them and you have 782 errors. Or there's an error on every single record and you don't know what exactly is wrong, but obviously there's something wrong with every record you shoved into the system. So you have all these things. You have iPads, you have this, you have that. And so what are you going to do to really move the institution forward when you have all these what I call mission critical things always happening to you? You've got to get out a calendar and you really have to think about what does this institution need and what does it want, And what I did when I was in institutional research is I wanted to put out some very good premier publications, but I couldn't do it all at one time. So I might put something out in January, February, or at least every quarter I would put out a publication. Now, it wouldn't just sit there and the president would go, "This is great, Lynn." But it was actually designed to actually feed back into the operational planning assessment, which helps feed back into SACS. You see what I mean? So everything you do, don't do anything unless you're feeding it into that loop, because then you'll get to accreditation and you don't have anything because you haven't been doing that feedback into that. Here is just some samples of some reports that I think are mission critical to all of our institutions. Like if I were running one of your schools today, these are the kinds of things that would have to come out to make me feel good about where we were with student success. There's an annual report. So you have a strategic plan, right? And it has 5 goals. At the end of every year, you really need another report that says, here's how we did on these 5 goals this year. Like your annual report, if it's just a bunch of stuff like here's the tennis team over here, and here's this over here, and it's just a bunch of random stuff, it really needs to go back and tie to the strategic plan. It'll help everyone remember what's in it and why we're all here doing this stuff. So there's the PR version, which is only the good news. The one you bring with you to Jackson, and the one you show the board and you show some people, but there's also the strategic plan assessment, which is the things you didn't get done. So you really need an internal and an external version of these sort of assessments every year. When I was at Mississippi Gulf Coast, we called this advancements. It was just had a title. And I would say, here's the advancements piece. And I would have departments coming up to me going, why are we not in there? And I said, well, your stuff wasn't good enough. It wasn't the best stuff, So when you get some competition coming along about who's going to be in the piece. Tracking transfers, I know we've been doing this forever, but you've really got to track your transfers and you've got to show some things. And use a little bit of math. It's really easy to say, these students transferred to USM, and these students were freshmen at USM and started there, and just do like a chi-squared analysis between them. It's really a simple calculation. It'll actually show you if your students are higher or lower, all in one little tiny click of the button to the mouse. Now, who does the CESI surveys of assessment? So y'all are doing them? I recommend, if you're not buying these surveys, they get into some of the details that you really can't get at with looking at graduation rates. What kind of experience are the students having when they first hit the door and some of that stuff. So I highly recommend you use CESI, but don't use their CAN reports. Get the data file that they do and do your own analysis. Like if you want to dig into something, like are the online students really, because there's a question on there that says, hey, are you an online student? So you can actually disaggregate between online students and non-online in their experience. Are your services the same for those two groups and things like that? And that's really wonderful stuff to, guess what, put right back on your operational assessment. Like, when groups would get together and say, here are my goals, Lynn, I would look at them, and I do not want to cook with an ingredient that I don't have in my kitchen, I'm looking at it, and I'm like, you can't have this goal because we can't assess it because we don't have the data. So we need to get the data, but here's the data we do have. So you have to facilitate backwards and let them know their goals have to change slightly because of the assessment piece within those goals. And that's really important for you to have that back and forth with them. Another thing that I recommend is doing an economic impact for your college. These pieces are a little bit tricky. You might need to get some help. I always called up to Jackson and said, there's a state economic office here, and I would say, hey, I need the multipliers for Harrison, Jackson, Stone, and they'll give them to you. So you can actually work with people here in Jackson, and they will get you your income multipliers that tell you when you spend $1 in that county, what part of that dollar stays in that county. And these are important things for you to have in your possession as a researcher or even as a college employee. Kind of a word on that, though. When you're doing an economic impact, don't cookie cutter it and make it look like everybody else's. Make sure there are things that are just specific to your institution, because every institution is different. You're serving different populations. So when you do an economic impact, it's about, here are the graduates, here are the jobs, here are the salaries they're making, and here are the taxes they're paying. Here is the money we give our employees. Here's where they live. Here's the total economic impact that Mississippi Gulf Coast Community College or Hines Community College is bringing to this city. Those are very important things. When she goes down here and tries to get us money, they have to have all that stuff in order to make us look good, Return on investments, I brought one, and I'll save it for last in case y'all are really asleep with your eyes open. But return on investments are important. And for example, the money they give us for a nursing program, I guarantee you can go in there and say, okay, we get this much money for nursing. Even though it's high cost, we get this much tuition. You can add up all the income for nursing, and then when you look at what you're spending on it, it'll be about $1.5 million in the hole to $2 million. It probably will be. But we all have to have a nursing program. I'm not saying you take this ROI and you say, we got to shut this program down. It's costing us, so it's not for that. But it enables you to know what it is you're spending your money on and what can you change. So if you're interested, I have like a sample ROI, which is no longer valid because once they changed the funding formula, it was actually based on a previous funding formula, but there's a spreadsheet within it that you can kind of toggle back and forth and look at it. And I think I did a presentation on this to the Career Tech folks not too long ago. Wasn't that? Okay, maybe she's not in the room. Okay, so also a new thing to assess, it's all about jobs. I mean, you can pick up any newspaper in the state and know that community colleges are being looked at, being funded, being recognized for the job production that we do, the direct impact to the workforce. And even though we have the transfer function, it's our job to kind of sift through all of that, and I recommend you really taking a stab at it, because if I were in your shoes, I wouldn't be just looking at placement rates, because we were doing that in 1982. That is just one metric. Placement is just, it's old news. What are these kids, I call them kids, well to me they are, I'm old. But where are they working, what are they making? You have to figure all that out, and it has to have a degree of certainty to it. At Phi Theta Kappa, I'm kind of limited. I have a lot of great stuff going on, and I don't really have that data where, InSpark's going to send me exactly what they're making. So I do an estimation analysis, and I'll show you kind of the databases that I use, but even if you want to estimate it, you need to do that at least if you're not doing that. In fact, I encourage you to estimate what the graduates in welding should have been making and then compare it to what yours really are. Because the cool thing is, if that number's higher, then you have a really good welding program. People are willing to pay more for your welders, or what do you want to call it. Also, not to kind of abandon the financial, all the fun little SACS things that we have to do, the financial ratio analysis, you have to continue to do those over and over. Don't wait till SACS is here and then all of a sudden be doing analysis of 3 and 4 years back, because then you really are wasting your time with what you've been doing instead of using it every year. So here's how I project earnings. This is so easy to use, a child could do it. But the student has a date of birth, and basically you put them in your the National Student Clearinghouse. You find out where they went to school and things like that. So you know the ones that went to work, you know the ones that went to school, and then you know what occupations they're in, sort of. Because there's a database that takes the school graduation, your school program code, like say computer science. If you're majoring in computer science, you might have 15 occupations that you're able to be in. Anything from a manager all the way to a web developer, in there a software engineer. They all have different salaries. The way I do my estimation is in Mississippi, I would calculate what's the probability that you're going to be a web designer? What's the probability that you're going to be a software developer? And I sort of do a composite of their salary. And I'll send you this if you want to see this spreadsheet. It's pretty simple. But it sounds complicated, but it's not. But I kind of encourage you to go through this process of estimating. It's kind of what they made us do. What was that? What did the federal government make us do to our career tech programs? That gainful employment. This is gainful employment, but you do it with everyone. Does that make sense? Everybody's like, yeah, right. But it's kind of cool because if you do the gainful employment calculations with your entire student body, you can really figure out where they're at and what's the top jobs in each field and things like that. Note to self, I'll show that in a minute. I have to make notes to myself even when I'm up here. Nice. This next one, Next one. Okay, here are my thoughts on faculty. Who in here is faculty? Good, because we all have thoughts on them. The thing about faculty is that you can't do anything at an institution until you get the faculty to like, okay, we're on board, and then it actually works, right? So here's the thing about faculty is, you know, I ask a Phi Theta Kappan all the time that wants to be a teacher because I'm very interested in them, like, why do you want to be a teacher? You know what the answer always is? What do you think it is? Speak up, people. What? Oh, summer's off? No, that's not it, actually. Oh, think Phi Theta Kappan, okay? Why would a Phi Theta Kappan want to be a teacher? It's always because they had a teacher that they loved, right? And I think that's good until it's not. Because what if you have a teacher that all they do is lecture, 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 and you loved them, and then you're going to lecture, 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 right? I'm like, well, you know, I always tell Phi Theta Kappans, if you hated the way your classes were taught, be a teacher and do it differently. You know? So anyway, so I don't know what we're going to do, but because it almost like it gets handed down from generation to generation to new teachers because they're always fascinated by one instructor that they had. And then they kind of, but then some of them are change agents and stuff like that. But anyway, we always talk about the 21st century student, right? I actually talk about the 21st century faculty member, and I actually codified it. You can hit the... and yeah, I haven't published this or anything, but this is the way I see faculty, and it's just sort of an interesting thought. And it's a thought I just want to leave with you. I'll get around to publishing. There's like 20 things I want to publish. I'm like always talking to Rosemary, we need to publish that, and we're still sitting here talking about it. What is this called? Do y'all remember this from? There, now y'all are speaking up. At the bottom, faculty members will always have to be an expert in their fields. Like you cannot teach mathematics without being a good mathematician. Or I guess you can try to pull it off for some time until some student will figure it out. So you have to be an expert, and that's always been this way from the beginning of time and continuing on. And then the first thing that started happening in the 80s and 90s is we had to have these active learning environments. Remember group learning and all this other stuff came along, and we had to kind of get used to that, not always being a lecturer like I am today and doing some other stuff, and that's sort of, to me, only the second step. And then along came distance learning. Oh, I remember when it hit. In 1993, it was like, you're going to teach all this on Blackboard. And I said, you cannot teach algebra on Blackboard. Because why? You couldn't then, but we did it anyway. We're such pioneers. But, when we say master instructional technology, you have to have your face-to-face and your online just as good. And that is not easy. And it's not easy for you to assess, but you've got to do that too. And I think we're getting there from a technology side, finally, in the last few years. So, are they teaching this, though? Are they teaching this in the four-year colleges, though? Are they coming to us already knowing how to teach D2L and Blackboard and all that stuff? Weak link. Saying. It's weird. It's weird that teachers are coming out. They're taking online classes, but they're not teaching them how to teach them. It's something to think about. So anyway, then along came Sachs and said, thou shalt have student learning outcomes, right? And everybody was like, oh my God. They're finally getting used to that to some extent. But what Sachs really meant is in your classrooms, we want you to research. We want you to teach one thing one way, and then maybe to your other classes teach it another way, and then compare those two things and see which way is the best way. So what Sachs was really trying to tell us is that they want us to use our classrooms as mini research environments. It wasn't about just creating a bunch of outcomes and measuring them and just, here's my data, here's my data. You know what I mean? It was about us really being researchers in the classroom. And I don't know if your faculty know this, so when you're meeting and talking with them about their learning outcomes, that's what they're supposed to be doing, and they need to think of it like that. And then along came Pathways, right? Are you guys part of the Pathways movement too? So is Phi Theta Kappa. Yeah, anything you guys do, I have to do it. Like, what are we doing now? When you go to convention next year at Phi Theta Kappa, there are going to be 8 pathways, and there are going to be employers that are going to be offering jobs from those 8 pathways to our members at convention. So that's the way I'm tying into pathways at Phi Theta Kappa. But pathway champion means that everyone in this room is a navigator of some sort, right? Isn't that the word we're using? It's a kind of, it's a scary thing for me because it seems like everyone has hung their hat on the pathways movement, and gosh, I hope it works because that's where we're at. And I think it will work. But you and I all, we all know that some things work for some students, some things don't. So I think we might need to have more than just pathways, but that's just my personal. And what's next? Who knows? I mean, can you guys see what's next down the road? Because being a faculty member, I think, is one of the hardest jobs in the institution because you come into the job knowing, just thinking this right here, maybe some of these first 2 steps, and then you're having to learn all the rest of this other stuff in your job. It's tough. If I were an HR person in a school, if a faculty member comes to me wanting a job, my interview would hang out in these areas and kind of sniff out so that we're not starting from step 0 with a new faculty member and not having, that's just my advice to I know you guys are on HR, it's just something to think about. This sort of changes the complexity of a job interview for a faculty member to me, is what it does. Okay, next slide. Okay, now let me just say something about research. So the researchers already raised their hand. I'm probably one of the only researchers on the national space, and I get into the room with these guys from Columbia, and nobody, guess what? No one's worked in a community college that's pushing out all the research that tells the federal government, that tells the state governments what we need to do. That should scare each and every one of you. It just makes me angry. I'm like, it doesn't work that way. That's not the way the colleges work. I said, they were like, why? And I said, because you're like 3 years old, you don't have hair yet under your arms, and you're telling us, no, I'm just kidding. But really, these people are like little tiny 20-year-olds that are running the country's research for community colleges. And, and the only reason they're doing it is because we're out here busting our butts trying to be practitioners, and we're not putting out any research about what works and what doesn't. So my challenge to you, not every year, or maybe once a year. Like in my strategic plan, I'm supposed to publish 3 times a year. And when I publish, I mean really get it out into some sort of publication and about what's really happening and what really impacts student success and what's really working. You guys know that, but until you get your mindset to actually publish it, no one's ever going to know, and we're going to continue to take the advice of people who have never stepped foot in a community college, and it bothers me really a lot. So anyway, next slide. So what do you need to do? I mean, obviously you have your iPad's data. Like when you know something cool is going on at your school, guess what? In order to prove that it's cooler than everywhere else, you've got to compare it to what's going on. So you have to learn how to do comparisons. So some of the sources of data that I would look to, and this is what I use in my job. Well, I don't do it anymore. I have a research grasshopper that I'm teaching, and she's doing a very good job. And none of you better steal her, so I'm not even going to give you her name. But anyway, National Student Clearinghouse has done a tremendous job of putting out reports. Like every semester, they put out the enrollment trends for the whole country. So like if your president's upset with you because enrollment's down 3%, then you should pull the national profile to see if you're in line with that because, just to kind of compare. And even as a state, you guys could get together at meetings like this and do comparisons with each other. I think that's a valid thing to start doing. We used to do that. I'm sure you still do that. The longitudinal beginning post-secondary database, that has a lot of questions in it, like do you work? And it gets into the details of students' lives. They're updating that right now. That's the database I used to show the whole world that Phi Theta Kappa really is better than just a high-achieving student. Because with that database, a student that has a 3.5 GPA has a graduation rate of about 56%. But a Phi Theta Kappa had a graduation rate of 91. So I'm going to take credit for each and every percent in between there until somebody comes and refutes the study that we did. And if you Google it, it's in Inside Higher Ed. But anyway, this is the database that I crawled into, and it does have state-level stuff in it. You could pull Mississippi data, out of this. And it's sort of a random, they track students for like 10 years and ask them questions all along the way. It's pretty cool. Another thing that I'm seeing is matching studies. This is more in the nonprofit sector, but if you have 10 students doing something, then you might want to take 10 students that have the same sort of GPA, the same sort of financial background, or whatever markers that you want to match them on. These 10 students are doing this. These 10 students are matched to these other students. If they're not doing that, how well are they doing? So you may want to design matching studies. These seem to be the most valid in the space right now. I can't even get a grant right now unless I'm doing a matching study, you know, with students from one part of the country with the other and matching them up and going, oh, he's 23, he's 23, he's white or he's white, you know, matching them on as many characteristics as I possibly can to make my studies value. And lastly, I'll talk about the good stuff. Anyone in here have any research kills? I'll just give you my only research kill, my only one. Isn't that terrible? Like, what do I call a research kill? It's when I did something in research and the president took it and did something with it. You know what I mean? Like, changed something. And I'll never forget, we had a multi-campus environment. And of course, the dean of this campus, or the VP of this campus, and the VP of this campus, they would always have certain wants and needs. So the president, his name was Dr. Willis Lott, he's retired now, he said, we only can hire 6 new faculty members. And so every one of the vice presidents went into his office and said, this is what we need. And then the next vice president didn't care what that vice president needed, but this is what we need. So Willis ended up getting, or Dr. Lott, sorry, he's Willis now to me, took a long time to get there. So he had these 25 faculty requests, and he only had money for 6 of them. So then he sends me an email, and he says, just tell me which ones I really need. And it was kind of a cool research problem because I'm sitting there thinking, 6 jobs are at stake here, you know, this is fun. So basically I took all the requests of the VPs and I just didn't even look at them. And I went into each department and I said, okay, how many part-time faculty are we using in each department? And then I looked at how big the classes get, because sometimes they get quite bulky. So then I took a combination of class size, and I took a combination of part-time faculty usage, and I developed this little formula that I ran over each department and spit out the 5 or 6 faculty members in order. And the cool thing was, when those job announcements came out that next week, it was everything that I had given him. So he used my data to do the job announcements on each campus. And so that's my big, huge research kill story. I hope you have one, because every once in a while you're going to need that to kind of keep going in this research world. And if you're not getting any research kills, you need to sit down with your supervisors and say, you need to use our data, or, you know, I'm going to have to go somewhere else. I'm going to go work for Lynn, you know. But anyway, so just kind of keep that in the back of your mind about that. Next slide. Whew. Okay.
I thought you were going to say how many institutional researchers had died in office. Some national statistic or something.
Oh, no. Actually, programmers die way more than our people. Because they're sedentary. Seriously. I actually got my job in research because someone died yeah, it was bad. We were going on a banner. It was stressing everybody out to the point of death. I remember that. Okay. Let me pull up that. Let me take this off. I'm a loud talker. Fortunately, my mother was deaf in one ear, and we yelled at each other. But here is sort of the. Can you guys see that okay? But like, this is that ROI I was talking about. So here's the ADM program. Here is the org chart and the, you know, whatever. So the FTE, is it still 24 for every FTE? See, this is already wrong. But this is when it was 24. So the amount of FTE in nursing was 320 that year. This date is all bogus. And the online FTE was that, because remember, we're paid differently for each of those FTEs. Now the state allocates a base for the ADM program, so that comes into play. And then there's the money from the NSVCC. And there's Allied Health extra money, because Allied Health programs get a little extra budgets. Now, there was an actual other $611,000 in what I call operating costs, okay? Now, this is where your ROIs get really hard. All these other columns, you're like, no, I can do that. This is like, who pays the president's salary? Who pays the director of admissions salary? These are all costs that the faculty have to carry, or the tuition, or the steady allocation, or whatever the inputs of that budget are, they got to carry it. So what I did, and I'm consulting on these projects, but I take up all that money that's unaccounted for, which is the salaries of all the human beings that are not faculty members, which would be accounted for in the salary of the faculty. Y'all with me? I know. Y'all can, you can upload these files and get them to validate. We can do multivariable calculus. So anyway, operating costs, all I do is it's this really big number in your budget that you spend on buildings and grounds. It's just everything. The librarians. Everybody's in this number. Okay? I actually don't add that up. I add up what I'm accounting for and I subtract the expenses. So it's just this big number. I don't really know what's in it. I just know that it's not accounted for by salary for the faculty, which is in the payroll here. And so I scale that. So remember the ADN had about 300 some odd credits, FTEs, right? So I take their portion FTE-wise and I assign it to them. It's a pretty simple percentage. So whatever percent of FTE that department is consuming, I make them carry that portion of the budget for all others and put it in there, okay? So that was the number that I made up. This is all made up.
What percentage goes into the operating cost?
It's the percent this FTE is of the total for every department. So let's say there was, 3,019 FTEs, it would be 10%. So what I do is I just say, here are the total FTEs, so what percentage your department of the whole? And then I just take the percent and I dump it up like that. And so that's just the way I account for all those nebulous costs that are going on, everything from the shrubs from the college to the president's salary or whatever, or the institutional researcher salary. So then total cost of the ADN program was $3.4 million, and then the revenue was so basically it's $1.3 million in the whole, and that's a typical calculation I would think for an ADN program. So you have to make up that somewhere else. But anyway, this is just sort of an exercise that it's tough to go through this for each line because, anyway, I encourage you to do this because it's not to know what programs to close, because obviously this is the exact opposite of what we would ever do. But it does give you some power to talk about. We didn't do it with just Career Tech, we did it with our academic programs. So let's take a look at the biggest college winner usually is in the social science. Everyone has to take social sciences there, right? Yep. So this was all the campuses teaching the social sciences classes. Same sort of idea. They ended up making $1.2 million in profit off of social science classes, which helped our nurses. So anyway, what I'm saying is, as much as we want to talk about career tech in this state, it's the transfer that fuels and funds it. So you have to give equal attention, or you'll have lousy. If you focus on career tech only, you can't afford what you need to do. I'm just saying, and this proves that out. And the way the spreadsheets work is they all have this sort of, like if the state allocation were to change, we would just change these figures and it would automatically recalculate all the spreadsheet. So these are all the common variables, which are totally bogus now because they're changing the formula. And I'm glad they, don't have to make it better. Totally out of time here. And you're welcome to get any of this stuff. I brought several copies of our strategic plan from Phi Theta Kappa. I'm super proud of it, but it's super secret lockdown. You can't get this in public. Mainly because we're not the only honor society, and I really don't want them to see our strategies. That's really my main reason. It's really competitive. The first part of this plan, though, you'll see Mississippi data here too. From here to here is just pure research. And then the plan actually starts here. And then, here are all the people responsible. this from, I think it was Cengage, no, it was, anyway, it was one of those, it's like a plan and a summary of the plan. You know, here's our commitments. So I didn't call them goals, I call them commitments, because I was trying to communicate to the staff that we're going to do this, we're committed. And so I had the commitments here, the strategies, the main ones, and then here was the outcomes of where we plan to be. So the assessment was included in the summary. So anyway, you're welcome to have one of these. And not that it would apply to your institution, I'm just really kind of proud of this little Lynn format. You know, your social media usage, you could actually probably use these statistics in your own strategic plan. And anyway, I'll leave a few of those up here and some cards from my assistant. I told her she might be hearing from some of you guys, and that way you can email her and get whatever parts of this. I'm done. And you're like, slow down. Any questions, comments, concerns? Anyone asleep? I appreciate you letting me come by and just dump puke my advice onto you, my 26 years of, actually no, it's 20. How many years do you have? Almost 30. Because I got 23. I got 29. I'm only 6 at 5 days after. Fun times, fun times. We're going to really miss you. I guarantee you. I was always, you were always explaining, no, you can't do it that way. In fact, I met with you when we were developing this stuff, 16 times? You were not even answering your phone after a while. Thank you all, and appreciate the comments.
Take a shorter break than we're planning to. See you in about 5 minutes.
Testing. 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 Testing.
No, they're still fixing
should be on.
Testing, testing.
You got it?
Yeah, can you hear me? Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Can you hear me now?
Oh, yeah.
We'll try to stick right to that 45 minutes. I don't think people will complain if
I was thinking you can make mine shorter.
Might be.
we'll talk. I'll tell you what to. I was looking good. I told her, I said, folks won't grumble or complain if we're short. But
Yeah,
if we're long,
right.
they
It won't be. If anything, it'll be short. Yeah.
Just give me a cue if I'm over like 20 minutes. I don't think I will be.
I'll just walk up there and.
Just grab somebody. You got the repellent?
Yeah. Is this?
I think it probably needs to be off on. Is it off right now?
I don't know. Is it? Is it on? Do I need to turn it off? Let me turn it off for now.
Probably right there.
Yeah.
Hello? Hello, hello, hello. Hello, good afternoon. Hello, can you hear me? Can you hear me? Okay, let's keep on going. So far it's been really interesting. Lynn and Deborah were awesome. And I'm sure Adam and Dr. Rucker will be awesome as well. So here they are. Mississippi Gulf Coast.
Oh, thanks for the enthusiasm. Good afternoon, everybody. We're going to be talking, I'm with Dr. Rocker, Adam Swanson. We're going to be talking about a project that we worked on to basically improve the efficiency of our upload. So let me go through, without further ado here, our historical process at MGCCC in terms of our uploads. Basically, IR would generate a text file. We would push it through in ears, and then ears, we have that big, kind of red X right here. We get validation errors. I'm sure most of y'all are familiar with that. And from there, we're a multi-site college. So what that means is we have to actually figure out which site the error was, it stems from, and then we need to communicate to that point of contact at each site and ask for them to make updates and banner to correct the issues, and then email us back when they're done. So we couldn't regenerate a file. Basically, they would make the corrections. They would send us each email. Sometimes we get 3 different emails saying, we're good, we're good, we're good. And then we would come back, and we would do this process over again and over for each iteration, over and over and over. And I remember the very first time we uploaded, and it took us like 4 months. And my hair was just like in the air, and I was like, surely this can be more efficient because we're spending a lot of time like doing the upload. I was like, this should be a 30-minute project. Like, we should be able to extract a file that is clean, that is accurate. We should be able just to load it and be in and out and be done with it, right? Because there's, as you all know, there's a lot of competing priorities in the office, and we want to make sure, that we have enough time to spend in other areas for the institution to advance them. So that was our process. And everything, I should have mentioned this before, all this process started at the close of the term. So this isn't something like if we were uploading a file, we would actually start this in the spring. Like this process would usually start the week after the close of the term. So when there are issues going on, not only are we communicating with all these sites and waiting for them to come back, but we're asking for the end user to go back retroactively and update a record from the prior term. And so they're saying, oh, I'm updating, this is fall term, upload them. It's February and you're asking me to go back into a file from August? And so there was some complexity there, and sites were coming back and saying, well, how do I retroactively change this, right? So basically the project is stemmed from basically two goals, if you think about it. Goal number one, for why did we make an investment into an internal air reporting model? Goal number one, it was just taking too long. And I'm looking at this going in terms of efficiency. There is a lot of opportunity to streamline, right? And then we wanted to reduce our time burden estimates. Basically, our staff, we wanted to come in, extract our files, we wanted them to be clean, and we wanted to go about our business and focus in other areas. So that's reason number one. Reason number two, you know, strictly from like the IEIR perspective, we are the data stewards. And there was a part where when I was going through this process the first time, I was like, this is our data. Like, we're submitting a file with somebody that graduated at the age of -2 at high school. This is our data. And like, you know, it actually became like a personal process, or personal here, that why are we, you know, as an IR office, I want to make sure when we extract a file that it's right, like it's precise. And it bothered me that we're extracting a file knowing that we have issues and they're not being addressed during the term. So the second point of the project is I want to make sure, like, when we are actually in the term, that the data that we're using is clean. And, you know, at our college, we're getting into the business of visual analytics. So folks actually can see the data real time in a visualization. So when they're consuming the information, if things are wonky, if we have -2-year-olds graduating high school, yeah, of course that's not right, right? All right, so the end result of the project, I'm sorry, you probably can't see that, is we took down a process that anywhere, I mean, we were loading files from 2 to 4 months, and we took it down, we uploaded the first 3 files in 15 minutes. The schedule file, we've got, I mean, there's a few audit issues that will be addressed in the next go round, but basically, yeah, we're in a position right now where with some confidence we could load all files in one day. We had, I believe, 1 course file error that will be addressed. Next go around will count for that. Faculty file, we didn't have any errors this go around. The PE file, admissions wasn't sent 1 email about a validation issue this go around after the end of the term. And then our schedule file, we had some audit related issues, as I mentioned before, but those will be addressed in the next go around. So in total, we loaded 46,000 records and, you know, could get in and out, you know, pretty aggressively. Okay, if you are interested, and it's not a one-size-fits-all. All institutions are a little bit different, and we recognize that. But in general, what we've done is just identify some steps that we learned along the way. Things, if you are interested, you know, if this does pique some interest and y'all would like to kind of replicate this model, these are 4 steps that we've identified is critical to the process. Step number 1. You need to identify who your stakeholders are in this process, right? Who are the people that, when you complete an upload, are your primary go-to points of contact? And for us, we have basically 4 groups. There's more stakeholders than this, but these are the primary stakeholders that have a hand in data entry and data process. Number 1, e-learning. These are subject matter experts. These are gurus with everything that's going on with VCC and online classes. So whenever we have an issue with any of the online instruction items, I go directly to our point of contact, our director of e-learning, and they're able to address those issues. Second, primary point of contacts. This group right over here, our admissions group. This group is responsible when you look at the PE file, the primary enrollment file, from the applicant data, all the data entry with the students, the residency, maintaining student records, basically everything in the PE file, which is a ginormous file, it falls on admissions, right? They're the gurus, the subject matter experts in the student, maintaining and grooming that student data. The third stakeholder is the teaching and learning unit. This is all your faculty members that are entering in information into easy attendance. And they're responsible for course file, faculty file, taking attendance, and the attendance rosters and the schedule file. So this group is this is a pretty big group as well. You want to have some points of contact in teaching and learning that you can go to when there's issues. You need to have those stakeholders teed up. And then the last group is basically us, and where we come in is IR. We're the data stewards. So, the way I saw it is like we have an obligation, responsibility to make sure when we extract file that it's right. And it should be right like the first time we extract file. And then we're also charged with, I know Raul went over some of the specifics in terms of changes to the reporting guidelines. Actually take a look at those reporting guidelines and make sure that we're getting them the information that they need. Okay, so that was step number 1. You have to figure out like who your points of contact are. Step number 2, okay, this is very important. Y'all are familiar with the validation reports that kick out at ears? You just nod your head if you are. Never, ever, ever delete one of those, ever. So what we did to start this project, I kept 2 years worth of these reports, and I just go into a blank Excel document and create 5 tabs. 1 tab says course, 2nd tab says faculty, 3rd tab says PE, 4th tab schedule, 5th tab graduate. Every time you encounter any issues in ears, add it. Keep adding it. Just keep adding that. And then run a pivot on each one of those tables. And when you run the pivot on the table, it's going to identify your frequency in terms of where are your issues. And I would suggest start with the ones that you have the biggest issues, like most issues. Work your way down. Start with the biggest issue and work down. Does that make sense? All right. But this was very helpful because this was our blueprint. Basically, this is the blueprint of how you create your internal layer report, because I would suspect if we took a look at each one of your air reports, like we're all a little bit different. But the things that are kicking back, you need to understand what's kicking back and why, and then you need to account for that. Okay, step number 3 is really thinking through the logistics. And when we got to this part in the project, it literally was like a week where we were like idle in this project. Because we're like, what is the best medium? What's the best forum to present this information? Okay, so we know conceptually that we want folks to address issues throughout the term, but is it best to set up the reports live or snapshot it? Is it best for the folks that are working these reports to be working in Excel or Argos or Visual Analytics? What is the best way? What is the best format to communicate this? So step 3 is really just think through the logistics of the project. You're going to have to come up with this project is who's responsible, like going back to your stakeholder slide, who's responsible for what? And what is the expectation? What is the deadline for completion? All that, right? So this is more just think through the logistics of how you're going to disseminate information, the expectation that comes along with this, because the process is going to move from, hey, you're working things after the fact, here's an email, to we're going to set these things up for you, but you're expected to work them throughout the term. Does that make sense? Have I lost anybody yet? All right. All right, step number 4, this is the last step here. This is the fun part, right, Jana? Yeah. This is the design, testing, and implementation. So this is where you actually get your hands dirty. And I tell Jana, it's kind of like, I don't know, when you vacuum the carpet and there's that the feeling after you've collected, all the debris and stuff, it feels good. When you start working on this project, it's kind of like high five moments when the reports work and things drop off. It just feels good. So this will be a little bit of time, to set this up. After a lot of thought, we decided to go with an Excel workbook just because most of the end users, it was pretty easy for them to understand. So basically we've got reports running at 11 o'clock at night. They would start at midnight. We snapshot. We have, I think there's 38 reports that we're basically running starting at midnight. All these text files, they get generated, they get plopped into a folder, a reference folder. And then the end users, basically they hit Control, Alt, Delete, and it will delete every single record in this entire workbook. And then they'll go into data refresh and it'll refresh all the records for that day. So it's a snapshotted model, and the reason we did that is because I wanted a way to go back. If you ask me about a particular date and ask me about an error, we actually have all the archived errors, so we can actually pinpoint on the day what issues we had. Does that make sense? So there's 2 workbooks. Workbook 1 is for instruction, so that's, this addresses faculty file errors, course file errors, and schedule file errors. And then workbook number 2, this is for admissions, and this addresses the PE file errors. And there's a kind of, we don't have a whole lot of time to go through each one of these sections, but we parsed off for admissions like different blocks of reports. So there's like a 10-day priority report. The reports in that section impact logic for first time, first year, and a bunch of other things. So we basically asked them, hey, these are the most important right now because it throws off like programming logic. Can y'all work this first? And then there's reports for cleanup on the cohorts. So that's where like the National Student Clearinghouse on the 10th day, we're submitting National Student Clearinghouse reports say, hey, these folks said they're first time, first year, but they have 10 records at another institution. Can you look at that? And then there's validation reports, and then most of y'all are familiar with the verification reports. All the verification reports are included in here. So when we complete and upload, everything that comes back, like it's accounted for. If you were to click on one of these tabs here, right, and look at a report, there's a standardized template for those reports. And basically, every single report that we put out, there's instructions. So we found there's some instances like a communication barrier between how things are programmed and the logic and the folks that are working the report. So what this does, it spells out, this is the logic that we're using to get this information. These are the banner forms. We're a banner institution. These are the banner forms that you need to look at. These are the different conditions. So this is basically a narrative of saying, hey, this is what's going on here, folks. And then this block, this isn't, again, every single report. It's a block of student information. So first name, last name, phone number, email, because sometimes admissions actually has to like call people or email. It gives them all the contact information. We have a column that says the first date that this error showed up in the report. So if something showed up, we're doing a spring upload and it showed up in January and it's still on our report in May, we have a way to say, hey, this record has been on the report for 5 months. And then the last column, this is probably the most important, is it's all the pieces of information that's relevant. So to prevent folks from actually having to go in their banner system and look at every single one of these records, which is very manual, we just give them every single column of information from the banner so they can actually see, they have the context for the error. Does that make sense? I lost anybody yet? All right, and I asked Dr. Rocker to go through a sample of reports. This is not exhaustive. We tried to actually pick ones that were maybe a little bit easier to understand because some of the reports you could spend 30 minutes just talking about one type of a report. So what you're going to see here is just kind of just a tip of the iceberg in terms of a sample things that we're accounting for within the reports.
Let's see, make sure this is on. Can y'all hear me? Probably too much. Probably too loud. Okay. But I'm just going to go through some of this report. The first one, this is one of our priority reports. And I feel like I'm too loud here, but it's the high school grad date and the date of birth. Because a lot of times, one of our biggest errors that we were getting was, and I love Raul's errors, by the way. They're just like, I like his error messages. But anyway, it's like age 0 when graduated from high school, please check. So that's the first thing that I actually went in and coded for. It's actually very simple logic. I look at the date of birth and I look at the high school grad date. And if they're the same, it returns an error. Or in the case of the negative 2-year-old, if they were actually graduating from high school before they were born, that's definitely an error. So it kicks this out. So like an example here, like their date of birth in Banner is June 7th of 2000. Their high school graduation date is June 7th. So obviously, either the likely issues here are that the date of birth was entered as the high school graduation date or vice versa. And then this very simple action we put on there is please correct, check it and correct one or the other. And this actually affects like the logic for a lot of things that we use to, we determine with like the dual enrolled and things like that, we look at the high school graduation dates. So that's important. Okay, and then next slide. Is this okay? And then like the second error here is when the student is dual enrolled and they actually don't have a grad date on file. And again, it's very simple logic. I look to see if their compliance is either in 6 or 1, meaning dual enrolled or a high school grad. And if it's null, then basically the thing you need to do is you need to put 1 in there. So they'll get an error message that says, hey, put in a graduation date. And then another error we get quite often, we were getting 99 county code errors. And that is when the address is actually in the United States, but there's actually no state or county defined, and there should be one. And so the logic here is that I just look to see basically if there is a null code, they need to put in the county code in the address. It's pretty simple logic to put into the program. And then the next one, this gets a little bit more complicated, the district code errors. So we were getting a lot of messages that said, hey, they're on a campus that's not approved for this program. And basically what I did is I took the file from EARS. It's basically you can go into the master CT programs table in the tables and views under EARS. And you can download your spreadsheet. I'm sure all of y'all have seen those files. And I downloaded the sheet and I actually imported it into a table in our database so that I can query it. So I actually go through now and check everybody's program against the ones that are allowed. And if it's not in an allowed if they're not on an allowed campus, I will kick out an error that says, hey, they need to be on one of these campuses. Please check, make sure it's entered correctly. So that's what we do with that one. And that has actually reduced that problem. And so yeah, we compare the student campus to the approved campus. And in this case, this example here, the major code, it's a SIP code. It gives you all these examples, the basket weaving example here. But the EARS approved campus was 21106 and the student was assigned 21105. So it just went to admissions to say, hey, make sure they're on the right campus, and they do that. So, and then a little bit more into the PE file errors. The invalid high school ACT code is another one that we used to get a lot, and it's another one where you can actually download the Mississippi high school ACT codes. And I put it into a table, and I actually query that against the student information. And if the code is not on the approved list, it triggers the error that says, please either correct it's a typo, which a lot of times you'll see a typo in a code, or it's actually a new school that we actually need to have added to the list. So, next slide.
And then I get a phone call.
Yeah, you don't necessarily need a phone call because, we have our little form now. We have the little form that's actually built into the table. And they can click on it and you can actually request a code. It actually goes straight to the state. And it requests it and it says, hey, this is not in our reference table. We need to add it. So it actually makes that really convenient. We just fill it out and it sends an email. And it makes it really simple.
We had emails that were getting lost in transmission, so a standardized form, when they say, hey, we're missing a code here, it just automatically gets routed, and it's a standardized template that we can track. It's easier for tracking purposes.
Yeah. And then another thing, we started looking at the course file errors after we cleaned up the PE file really well. This took several months we did this over several terms of iterations of errors. And we pretty much focused kind of on one file at a time. And with the course files, then one of the things we got were the course file subject numbers. Like the subject number actually doesn't match the EARS approved codes. And once again, we went to our handy dandy little tables and views, and we got the course number reference table. And I have that in a file that I query against all the courses. And if the last number in the course is supposed to match the number of hours, and if it doesn't, it kicks the error out. And then that goes to instruction to help to see, okay, hey, y'all need to fix your course file information in Banner to match and make sure it's right. So another thing we do. And then another problem we have, and this comes into play when it comes to determining the census dates and things like that, is when we don't have any meeting dates. So we actually keep track of how many times the course meets. And in Banner, there's a little table here. Yeah, I don't know if anybody who uses Banner, you're familiar with this, but you fill out the meeting time, start date, end date, and then check your days of the week. But sometimes a class may not have any days of the week checked, or it may not have an end date or something. And we need that to be able to determine how many times the class meets. So that will kick out an error and say, hey, you need to fill out your information so we can get accurate census dates for this class. And then a faculty file error, excuse me, is missing faculty discipline codes or an incorrect faculty discipline code. But most of the time for us, if it might be missing. So that's another field in Banner, a category, and if there isn't one, it triggers the error, and then they have another report that they'll fill out to enter. And there's a lot more that we use. This is like Adam said, this is a very small example of what we are actually doing. But it does definitely add, it makes the uploads much faster and much easier because we're fixing everything during the term. So, and then one of the take-home messages probably from what we're doing is you can use those EARS reference tables to your advantage to check your data during the term and clean it up. Like make sure you match what we're supposed to have.
And I'll just add, like, once you get into the project, I think it gets addicting because you find things that maybe it doesn't particularly pertain to state report, but there's other issues, data issues going on. And so the error model has actually expanded to, it's bigger than just state reporting. We're looking at other issues that might not be fed up that we're asking for individuals to clean up. So are there any, we tried to reserve a few minutes for questions. Are there any questions at all?
Project timeline.
I think it was just starting with the errors, pivoting those, understanding where your issues are, and then just go forth and conquer. I think we're all going to be in terms of length. We're all going to be, some institutions, I'm not sure, but they might just have a few issues, so it might be really quick. For us, we came in and there were lots of, there was a lot. So I would approach it, I guess my recommendation, just approach it like one day at a time, and to be able to get everything tweaked and polished and perfect on the first iteration is probably not going to be feasible. But as you experience things, just tackle it, like account for it, and really give thought to like the model of how the communication is going to flow. Like who are the points of contact that need to be aware. So, for instance, we had discussion with teaching and instruction. So these are the reports. We need these done by the close of each term. So the expectation is by the close of each term, you all are done. We come in the day after the term ends, and we can just run the files, right? Admissions, same deal. Had a conversation with admissions. These are the things we're looking at. And I would also encourage like making sure that, with those stakeholders, it's a collaborative with the 4 stakeholders that, we mentioned. It is a collaborative work. So they're going to come back with feedback and say, this is actually right. And there might be modifications, tweaks that you need to make. So it's kind of an evolving project. So.
How much errors did you collect? You said a year, like a term or 2 years worth?
Yeah. So it's going to be the current term. So for the summer term, that's already up and running for us. So for instance, like admissions has access, they can see any one of the related admissions errors at this point right now. And then typically they close like a week or 2 after the end of the term, but the expectation is we're all cleaned up, we're ready to rock and roll by the end of that term.
Before you started the project, to kind of have a research to see how many errors you collect?
Oh, a lot. A lot. Yeah, I don't know. What would you guys estimate?
Well,
Hundreds?
We started this process as well a couple years ago, and the very first time my assistant ran the file, she printed it out and she brought it into me, and her mouth was just floored because she had 17 pages of 11 by 17 spreadsheet in 8-point font filled. And those were only the errors. The clean data wasn't on there. And she brought that over to the registrar's office like, I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry. And they cleaned that up. And now when she sends them the file, it's actually a normal size piece of paper. And there's a couple of them. You know, it's dramatically different.
Yeah, and I might defer this to Dr. Bonfani and his team, but I would probably, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but the first go around, it might have been a little bit overwhelming, like some of the reports, because there are issues that we had never really, we had, as a research office, we had never presented these records before. But now I think if you were to take a look at the workbook for the summer, and feel free to disagree, that it's much more manageable.
Horrified is the word that comes to mind. The first time you approached us and we saw that report, we were horrified at the size of it, at all the errors he had found, and that it was on display now for everyone to see, the president, the vice president, everyone. And I kind of joke about that, but if you go down this path, you have to keep that in mind. The end user, approach them gently and say, hey, we just built this machine that shows all of your errors. And then, of course, there's the work to, it looks overwhelming, the amount of time we now have to go clean all of this up. And those first couple of terms, it was, you know, and they come to us and say, hey, you've got 10 days to clean all of this up. But now it's much more manageable. We're not getting nearly the amount of errors coming through every term. And we meet the deadlines and all that. The other thing I think, and you alluded to this, was there's going to be a lot of give and take the first time you do it, because the reports were not taking into account all of the nuances of what we were doing. Just as a simple example, the first time they came through and they said, hey, you have these people marked as first-time freshmen. They can't be because they took courses before they graduated or something like that. But it wasn't taking into account, for example, the summer term, that a student could take a summer term and that, or dual enrolled and things like that. So we had to do a lot of talking, and even to this day, we meet at the end of the term for the ones that just could not get off the report to discuss why are these errors there and what are we going to do about it. We sit down with IR but last time I don't even remember, guys. I mean, it was a handful.
Yeah. Yeah, the nice thing.
My best in how they're programming with the state.
Right.
In this conversation, we pretty much have it down to a science where we can say, this is going to cause us an issue, this one, and this one. So we get it cleaned up. So they made the adjustments, got it cleaned up, and again with B file, gone through with zero records. So.
But I know when we started doing this, our registrar's office would go, oh wait, we're putting in stuff this way, and that's what's causing this 500 errors. We needed to be doing this. Whereas us telling them in advance, you know, this needs to change, it didn't have the same impact. You know, our IT director had been telling them that for years. That didn't have the same impact as me handing them this and them having to go manually fix these 500. Then it was like, oh yeah, I need to change this process. And so what was cleaning up the errors was the process changes within the departments that us showing them all these.
Absolutely. I think when you start trucking down this road, you're going to see areas of opportunities, and the most ideal solution is you account before it even becomes an error. If we use the example of a negative 2-year-old student, before it even becomes an error, you have verifications or validation set up on the front end so they cannot submit bad data, right? So you can't have that. So I think when you start going through that, you start thinking when you have lots of errors, like, is there anything we can do on the front end to prevent this from even happening in the first place? Because then it doesn't show up in any of the reports. Any other questions?
Nice work.
Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
I guess another thing I want to say about the Gulf Coast is that I guess we're the second largest institution in the state. And so they used to take a long time to clean up the stuff. There's a lot of records, a lot of different things, different, I guess, in some ways. But now, I mean, they were the do this because I've noticed the 180-degree change that they did, and I appreciated it, and I still do appreciate it. So, thank you. Now we get Eric Edson and Stephanie for talk about IHL updates.
I think this will work. Maybe it doesn't work.
One of those is not working.
Thank you, Raul, and I'm find a happy medium here. Good afternoon, everybody. It's good to see you. Thank you for this opportunity to speak to you about several of our IHL updates related to data. There are 4 items on my agenda, and I've organized them in terms of least direct to most direct impact on this audience. I thought that might be a little bit more helpful for you. So don't pay attention yet, right? Because we're gonna start with one that doesn't really impact you, but I think it's still important. During the 2017 legislative session, HB 649 established the Mississippi Data Management Working Group, or MDMWG. HB 649 tasked the working group to conduct an examination of our state's data resources and therefore prepare a report for the legislature on the findings, including any recommendations for improving data management practices. So the working group is basically gathering data by providing over 120 agencies with a comprehensive online survey. The survey focuses on all financial and non-financial data maintained by the agencies and asks questions related to the size of the databases, frequency of updates, and status of patches, backups, and other archival processes, as well as the costs of hardware and software. The community colleges were mercifully omitted from the study, given their local governance structure. The working group has been meeting regularly all year and has recently administered the final survey to the state agencies, and those agencies have until June 21st to provide a response. And our report to the legislature is due by December 2018. And I was on the survey working group subcommittee, and so just be thankful you don't have to go through this near the end of the fiscal year. Another item of interest for us is the General Data Protection Regulation. Has anyone heard of this? A couple of head nods, good. The General Data Protection Regulation was adopted by the European Parliament in April 2016, so a couple of years back, and it became effective on May 25th, 2018, so just about a week ago. Essentially, this is Europe's version of FERPA on steroids. Yeah, the articles provide data subjects with more control on how their personal data are handled, and that includes a right to erasure or right to be forgotten, otherwise known as deletion requirement, as well as a data portability requirement, where upon request, data subject, as they're referred to, must be provided to themselves in a machine-readable format. So if I asked you for all my data at your institution, you would be held responsible for doing that. And there are fines that can be imposed, as well as individual data subject actions for breaches of the GDPR. So our universities, particularly our research institutions that have high numbers of European students, are making ongoing preparations to handle these new requirements. And there is some concern over this new regulation becoming the new standard in the United States. So stay tuned and stay aware. Also, this doesn't just apply to students, whereas FERPA is applying mostly to educational records. An educational record at our institutions under FERPA doesn't apply to staff or faculty. However, the GDPR does. So, and also alumni. So if you have alumni in Europe and you're marketing to them, be aware that the use of their data in Europe is something to be concerned over. The next one is a little bit closer to possibly something that may be of interest to this group, which is data suppression. As our office has expanded the delivery of data to the public domain, and as Adam mentioned previously about data analytics and all those types of tools, the use of interactive visualizations have really reduced the number of ad hoc requests that we've seen come through, and we've also helped improve our data quality due to the extended use of the data. However, recently we were asked about data suppression and these techniques, and this started a conversation about how and why this practice could be employed. We've decided to pilot the use of data suppression in our student financial aid dashboard, which is currently published on the mississippi.edu/research, since these data may be considered sensitive, more so than just general enrollment by program, etc. For example, previously, a user could actually filter that same dashboard for white females that are enrolled at Alcorn State University that received a Child of an Employee scholarship. It could go down to 1. And while that may identify a student in that case, we thought that may be a good place to practice the use of data suppression. So before we did that, we actually reached out to IPEDS, Integrated Post-Secondary Education Data System, the Southern Regional Education Board, and Complete College America to get their takes on data suppression practices and activities, since those are the 3 agencies that we report a lot of our external data to. And there seems to be no consensus. Let's go figure, right? However, a limit or 5 to 10 seems to be the preferred thresholds based on our conversations with these groups. So suppressing the number of counts once it hits 5 or 10. And if you go out and you look at our student financial aid database, or visualization rather, you'll notice that once you get below 5, it becomes an asterisk, but you can still see the amount of aid awarded. So it's only suppressing a count, not the amount. So we are committed to protecting students' privacy, and we'll continue to have discussions with our institutions, chief institutional resource officers, regarding the use of data suppression overall. And lastly, IPEDS. I'm keeping it brief this year. There are no new changes for the 2018-19 cycle. And I heard a woohoo. It's exciting. And while no changes may be comforting to those of you in the room who prepare the data and submit the data, it also means that we're now expanding our understanding of higher education in the United States. So there are topical areas that are growing in prominence, such as dual enrollment, distance learning, and when IPEDS doesn't expand, we can't answer questions. So I will counter your woohoo with a, oh man, but don't be disturbed by that. We will be expanding the data collection more than likely in the next approval cycle. So the next technical review panel, which is how much of IPEDS expansion or changes comes about, is going to be on the decennial classification of instructional programs. So all of you work with zip codes, right? 52 business, 45 social sciences, and that sort of thing. This upcoming decennial review, which happens every 10 years, will not necessarily be focusing on reclassifying current programs, like changing nursing to something else, but rather expanding those 9 codes. So every zip code is a 6-digit number, and at the very end are the last 2, which are the program-specific codes. So if you had a business program that ended in 52 blank blank 99, that's typically a business other kind of program, and those are the programs that we're looking to expand the SIP classification with. For example, one of our institutions is offering an adult education master's program. So kind of not your secondary education, not community college education, but focusing on adult learners. And that was one that we recommended to NCES to be included. We've also got a slew of cyber security, technology related zip codes that have all kind of broadened in terms of popularity at institutions over the past 10 years. Now, after the SIP discussion, we'll have a technical review panel on finance. So anyone in the room that works within financial systems and finance-related data to iPads, I'll keep you posted on that if you want. And if you have any suggestions for a new or revised SIP and have not submitted those to NCES, please reach out to me. I'm the iPad State Coordinator, and I'll be happy to talk to you about that. Also, any other technical review panels that we might have coming up, I'll be happy to keep you informed as well. I tend to present on those to the mayor group every year, and so that information is already out on our website. So thank you for your time, and I will yield any remaining time to my colleague Stephanie Bullock, also from IHL, and we'll take your questions at the end. Thank you.
All right, good afternoon. Are y'all awake? Do y'all need to jump up and do some jumping jacks? Everybody okay? Good deal. I'm going to be, hopefully, more brief than Eric. I just wanted to give you guys a little update on Complete to Compete. We have just finished another semester, and we haven't even been live a year yet. So we're very proud of the success that we've had thus far. As far as total applications in the system, we have almost 11,000 applicants in the system. That's 11,000 adult learners that want to come back and finish their degree. So that's encouraging. Not all are qualified. We do have some that are ineligible for whatever reason, but that's a very small percentage. So that should be very encouraging to you guys. For summer enrollment, this was as of Friday. We had 208 people enrolled for summer, but as you are very well aware, people can enroll all throughout the summer due to the different terms, so we expect that number to grow. Fall enrollment, we certainly expect to grow. It was only at 166 as of on Friday, but we had over 400 enrolled for the spring, so I expect that number to be pretty large. Thus far, we have awarded over 400 degrees, and I have it broken down here for you. Associate degrees, we've awarded 298, and bachelor's, 159. Yeah, woohoo! Just wanted to highlight some of our success stories. I think that it's important for you guys to see some of the happy faces and hear some of their stories, because I know y'all are on the data side of things and you don't necessarily get the warm and fuzzy, fun, feely things, but I think that your hard work goes toward, you're part of the reason for these smiles, and so I thought that you should see some of them. So this one here is Mr. Melvin Scott, and his daughter actually works at one of our IHL institutions, and she heard about it. She called him. She said, you need to check on it, and sure enough, he did not need additional coursework to earn his degree. So he walked, and I actually have a picture of him walking, and he's walking across the stage with his hands lifted. So it's pretty cool. And then we have the Cicely, the next one in the middle, and she is a brain cancer survivor, and she did have additional coursework, and she walked and finished her degree. Then all the way on the other side is Becky Teasley, and Becky has a very sad story, but is very determined in helping others. Becky lost her grandmother and all three of her children in a car accident about 4 years ago, I think it was, and she had stopped out of school, obviously just needed to gather herself and make ends meet, but she graduated with an associate's degree in spring, and she is enrolled to finish her bachelor's degree now and wants to help others go through grieving and trauma issues like what she's been through. This is a mother and son that graduated together. The mom went back to school and finished with her son at ICC. That's a mother and daughter. They look like sisters, yes, but they are indeed mother and daughter. Graduated from Colin together in the spring. One was at Natchez campus, one was at the Wesson campus. And then we also have Ms. Saguna Nixon there on the bottom. I believe she had additional coursework, but it was only a class or two. Y'all, this is just a very, very small percentage of the stories that I get, and I just wanted to kind of share those with you so you can see where your hard work is going to. And then since you guys are the data folks, I thought we might want to talk about data reporting and kind of what we're asking from you guys and from the institutions, and kind of explain why. I don't know if anybody tells you why, because I'm not the one relaying the messages to you. But due to the funding that we've gotten for the program, you may or may not know we're a grant-funded program solely. And so we do have to report back to the funders, as y'all are all probably very aware and have done that forever. But MDHS and then Kellogg are requiring information from us, and thus that's why we ask for certain things from you guys. They're asking for things we don't have that we are trying to figure out on the back end how to go back and get what we need, but that'll be for me to figure out. Probably do those through some surveys and things like that. Things like what is their annual income, what do they plan to do, what are they going to do in 5 years after they get their degree, stuff that we'll have to ask them about. But they're interested in how we're using the money and how those, how it's affecting, who it is affecting. And a lot of questions have come back about the dashboard and, well, can we get the data from there? Unfortunately, hindsight's 2020. And the dashboard was designed originally just as a communication tool between me and the coach, so that I could kind of know where our people were in the system. We really didn't see the dashboard as a tracking tool for all of the different scenarios that have actually come up. Unfortunately, I wished if I were to do it over again, the dashboard would look very differently and work very differently. But it is just for us to communicate back and forth. It unfortunately does not track who is, like, I can't pull a report that tells me who's continuing enrollment right now, and I can't pull a report that tells me who got their degree with or without coursework. And I actually have a senator asking that question, and trying to figure out how to get that information. It'll be very manual and very labor intensive on my end, but and some of our coaches' ends. But like I said, the dashboard doesn't do those things, and we're hoping that we can figure those things out going forward. But I think that's going to be a part of the reports part of the reporting that you guys are sending back to us anyway. But I just wanted to explain what the dashboard does and what it was meant for originally, and what I wished it would have done, but it doesn't. And certainly wanted to make sure that everybody did understand that all the institutions are doing this on a volunteer basis. You actually don't have to participate in Complete to Compete. So if opting out is something that would need to be talked about, we can certainly do that as well. It's not something that you're being made to do by any means. So I wanted to make sure everybody was clear on that also. Any questions on the data reporting or what is being asked from you on Complete to Compete? Nice. Okay. Well, that is it. I probably wasn't as brief as Eric. I got caught up on those success stories. They get me. If this is my information, if you didn't have it already and you need me in any form or fashion, I am readily available and be glad to help you in any way that I can, and I appreciate all that you guys do to help us. Thank you. Do you have questions for Eric? No?
Well, if you're still awake, this should be the last one. Let me just I'm gonna try to make this short so we can get out of here early today. I believe we have one college that brought gifts anyway, so I'd like to maybe do the. We'll do that one today. That was Pearl River, yeah. No tickets? We'll just do it here. Good question. Okay, we won't do it. Never mind. That's the problem when you work with these two ladies. They all go, why, how? Can you read my mind? I guess not. I know. You do a great job, so. Anyway, we've been talking about, or I have been talking about for a while, about a way to maybe do attendance in a more efficient and quicker way to make it less onerous for everyone involved. And for David and Beverly, instead of taking 2-3 days to do it, the theory behind it is that maybe as you upload, the upload system is auditing the attendance and that way we can expedite all the reports and get done and completed quicker. So I call this attendance via the schedule file. So in essence, you're still doing 100% attendance. We're just letting the computer do 99% of the work. And I know they're efficient, but I think a computer tends to be a little faster. So the background is the state law says that the student has to be in attendance. The old way that the semester used to be a regular semester doesn't really apply. We got a lot of mini and what I call micro terms. So dividing things into weeks and trying to account for cutoff dates and all of that gets a little cumbersome and tricky. And so that's the background. Reviewing each and every roster is not very efficient. And the best part, the one that gave me the most impetus to follow this is that all of you are already tracking attendance. Regardless of the audit, you're doing it for your own purposes to improve retention anyway. So you're doing that to begin with. So I just want to piggyback on this. So the concept is to let the computer do the audit, most of the audit, and then the auditors can do maybe 25% manually. And if everything goes well, say in a year or two, bring it down to 15% or so. So we're greatly going to reduce the time it takes to go through an audit. Tremendously improve efficiency. So what do we need? What are some of the things that we need for this method to work? We need a start and ending date of a course. We need to know how many times that course meets during the semester. That way, a lot of you have what I call irregular starting times or irregular meeting days. So you may have, like in Banner, you may have one record showing this class meets Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and then you got another record, okay, well, the second or third Thursday of the month, we meet again. So does the class meet twice a week? Does it meet 3 times a week? It gets really tricky and confusing. You're trying to decide which one of those Banner records to use. The cutoff date, we need it to be 1/3 of the total meeting times, how many times the class meets, we'll do 1/3 of those. That'll be the part that is monitored. That's the part that will be audited. From that, we can determine, that will be the audit period. Then from that, we determine the allowable absences. What's the maximum number of absences a student? And we have that already. We have an absence chart. So we turning it around a little bit. And then after that, you got what's called the return period, which I guess some of you are used to say, well, we're going to track the student for 2 more weeks after the cutoff date. That will be on a regular semester where you have 6 weeks and then 2 other weeks and all of that. But it gets real tricky when the courses are short. Now, one couple of things we don't need anymore. We don't need to know the start time of the class, so that field could be blank. You don't have to worry about if the class begins at 10 a.m. or 3 p.m. Doesn't make any difference. We don't worry about whether the class meets Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, or whether it meets Saturdays, whatever. We're just going to count the actual days that the class meets. Holidays, different people I've been talking to. Some of you say, let's include the holidays. It makes it easier. Pretend that there's classes on those days. Some of you say, no, that's not very accurate. We need to remove those because there's no classes going on. I'm open for discussion on that. So just keep that in mind, okay? Let's not make a decision just this moment. But I can go either way. I just like it to be consistent among all 15. And there's pros and cons both ways. Instead of having the old absence chart, I call this one the attendance chart. So, for example, in a traditional class, you had, say, Monday and Wednesday, met twice a week, was 15 weeks long. So the total number of times you're going to meet is 30 times. 1/3 of the 30 is 10 times. If you remember from the absence chart, the maximum absences is 4. And the formula that I have still came with 4. And then you would track the student for 3 more meeting periods to see if the student returned. And we'll get to the return period in a second. So I'm not calling this the absence chart anymore. I'm calling it the attendance chart. So you can program this in, or I can give you the formula either way. 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. So let's discuss each one of the terms. The total class meetings is based on the start and end dates, is the number of times a class will meet during that term, regardless of how many banner records you have on that particular course. You add them all up, and that's how many times. Possibly we include the holidays, possibly we don't include them. It'll be your decision. Whatever you guys decide, I'm okay either way. Just consistency, that's what I need from all of you, so we all do it the same way. The audit period is the number of times, the number of meeting times for which attendance is being monitored, for which attendance has to be audited. Begins on the first day of class and it ends on the cutoff date. This would be the 1/3 equivalent as we reference in the state law. So we're not breaking the law, we're just pushing it to the limit. Allowed absences, you know that, the same deal as before. Number of maximum classes allowed to miss. the absences are only counted during the audit period. So if the student exceeds that, those credit hours for that class cannot be reimbursed. It's that simple. So you set the flag, the include flag to 0 for that, not for the entire student, for that class in the schedule file. Return period, this is one that is a little tricky to understand, but basically it goes like this. A student has perfect attendance and then on the cutoff date falls asleep and doesn't come to class. Once upon a time, they used to take the student out altogether. Then, about a year or so before I came, or maybe sometime before, they added those 2 weeks to see if the student came back. We do not count absences during that period. All we do is, did the student come back at least one time during that period? If the student came back, the student's okay, we include that student because he didn't have absences during the audit period. Now you're going to tell me, so what if the student had 5 absences, is absent on the last day of class, on the cutoff date, and then he's got 3 more absences. 5 plus 3 is 8. Should we take the student out? No. He only had 5 absences during the audit period. And he came back once. So that student is good. He's okay. We'd reimburse that student. If the student didn't come back at all, he's toast. Is that clear as mud? Okay. So let's talk about more specific about fields that we need. We talked about starting date, you already have that. End date, you have that. This will be a new field, the number of times a class meets during the semester, in the term. Whether it's 2-week class, 3 weeks, 15 weeks, doesn't matter. Just count the number of meeting times that the class will take place. In a class with regular times, just count them all. Then another field will be the number of times for which we'll monitor or track attendance. So it will be 1/3 of the other number. These 2 fields, start time and meeting days, you can leave blank. We don't need those anymore. We'll get there. There it is. On the schedule file, these 3 fields exist, which are the last date attended, the number of absences, and the return. So those do not change. It's still the same. And those are based on whether your course file says, yes, we're going to track attendance this way, the electronic attendance. If the flag is set, then these 3 fields become mandatory. If you want to do the class the old traditional way and you want manual review, then you put on the course file a 0, and then you don't worry about these 3 fields. So let's go through a sample calculation in determining whether to include or exclude this schedule record. If the student is not included in the primary enrollment file, he's toast. Don't even bother with it. Just put a 0 on that schedule file. those hours don't count anyway, shouldn't count. If the student audited the class, well, we don't want to pay for that either, so just that one is those two. If the student is okay on the primary enrollment file and the number of absences exceeds the maximum for that audit period, he is he's toast, right? No, he's not in, he's out. Out. If the student is okay on the primary enrollment file, has not exceeded the maximum number of absences, then we look at the return period. If he didn't come back, he's out. If he showed up at least one time, whew, he's safe. You can get the hours. Now, if you don't like to use tables and you like to use formulas, I'll give you the formulas. If you want the tables, you can plug those in, whichever way makes it easy. I'll give you both. We will need to decide whether to include or exclude the holidays or other official closures for the college. I mean, you may have snow days, you may have storms, whatever, or you may decide, no, it's too complicated, let's just include everything. I'm okay either way, as long as we all do it the same way. That's if we do it incorrectly now, at least we'll be consistently incorrect, and then we can fix it, 3 to 5 years down the line and make it more correct next time. But I'm willing to start someplace. What I need is some volunteers to pilot this for this academic year. If you don't want to volunteer, we'll just do it like you always did it. She volunteered? Okay. Okay. We got 2, 3 volunteers. All right, we're cooking with gas now. 4, man. Of course. I mean, this will be for the summer. So you can go back to your colleges, talk to everyone involved, discuss it. We still need to agree somehow whether to do the holidays or not to do the holidays. I don't want us to decide right here at this moment. Of course. It won't cause. Right, and that's what I'm saying. I think we need a consensus here to say whether you want to include or not to include those. I'm either way. Either way works for me. I think everyone needs to kind of agree. We'll just do it online there.
certain programs. Take that out of the equation. Class starts here, the class ends here, and we just these days. That's simple math.
Programmatically, for me as a programmer, I would prefer your method because makes it a lot easier. It's no,
Almost never have a student absent from class on a holiday. So that's a free day for me.
that's right.
So since me as a college, because I never get anybody marked absent on spring break.
I agree with that. It is a freebie. I agree. It is a freebie. And like I said, if you want to make it more complex, hey, I'm okay with that. I just need to know so we all do it the same way. That's the only requirement that I have is I want to make sure that all you agreed or agree to disagree, and let's move on with whatever we decide if you want to be in this. And I think there's pros and cons both ways. I mean, I can see, I have talked to several of you, and I have gone home and talked to my pillow, and I know that there's really good reasons on both sides of the coin. But ultimately, the question I get from you guys is, well, I want to make sure that my data is in line with his data and her data. I want to be consistent with everybody else. And that's the part I want to make sure that we all agree upon.
I'm just trying to be clear. We're not asking anybody to mark anybody present on a holiday. We're just asking you not to mark them absent. That's basically how you do this. We're not saying cheat. It's saying just don't mark anybody absent. And then that'll make it really easy for data to pool, I think, because you don't have to say subtract minus, subtract minus, subtract minus. It's just to be straightforward. So it's not like, hey, we're cheating in our report and saying people were actually at school. No, we're not saying anything. So that way we don't have to count them absent. And that's the only thing he said that counts, right, Raul? Absence is what is counting here.
Yes.
So we're not actually doing any fraudulent reporting. We're just not marking people absent when they weren't absent because we didn't have class. So it just keeps a consistent number, I think.
And I think I can stay out of orange uniforms by saying that we're all doing it the same way. This is agreed upon, and that it's still a pretty decent, accurate, fairly accurate way of doing it. It's a lot more accurate than what we're doing today anyway, because once you begin to get down to about 4 weeks, the accuracy of what we got is pretty lousy, So this will improve that, for sure. So if this is a plan, do you think it will work? I see some yeses, that's good. No, you always have the option when it gets a little far out to always say we will not do this class or this set of classes through this method. You can always do it where we go back and we do it roster manually. So that's always an option, because those classes that come with a 0, we're saying we're doing this the old way, those will be audited manually like we always have. So you're going to have to print those and deal with barreling. You know what difficult it is to do barreling. So. Well, this is it for today then. Now, tomorrow, you're going to have to stay at least through lunch, and at lunchtime is when we're going to have the raffle. We got an iPad, a $200 Amazon card, $175 Target, I think it is, or one of those. $125 from somewhere else. So we got some good stuff, man.
For Birds of a Feather, I've just been asked, like the Sire Group is having a Birds of a Feather.
I think, I think all three groups are staying, as far as I know. I think the IT guys are staying as well too. And I believe admissions were too. So. Well, thank you, everyone. I think. $8:30? Oh, and yes, you still have breakfast tomorrow, and same deal as today. Primos. I mean, the stuff was good this morning. All those pastries are delicious. So.